Welcome to the Dissecting the Wisdom of Shaltazar episodes. My name is Jeffrey Eisen. I'm a spiritual life coach, the channeler of Shaltazar, and an energy intuitive. In these episodes, my collaborator and friend Mark Lane and I will be picking a particular message in each episode that we will be reviewing, having a conversation about, and dissecting the wisdom from. The messages from Shaltazar are very high-level master teachings, and it is key to peel them away, dissect them, comment on them, and discuss them in order to get the greatest value. We hope you'll be intrigued, we're confident you'll learn, and we know you will benefit. Welcome back to another episode of Dissecting the Wisdom of Shaltazar. I'm back with my collaborator and good friend, Mark Lane. Welcome back, Mark.
Thanks, Jeffrey. Great to be here.
It is indeed. And today, the message that you've chosen for us to dissect the wisdom from is?
Who is Shaltazar?
Interesting. Who is Shaltazar? What attracted you to this message?
Well, this is kind of goes back to the beginning of my interest and involvement in the Shaltazar messages. I listened to a couple of the recordings and was, fascinated and drawn in, and the wisdom, resonated with me pretty deeply and completely. I guess the question I started, asking myself is, at the beginning of all the messages, you sort of recite the same prelude. We represent the Gavish Baninu energy, the energy of 33. We are the master teacher, and it just occurred to me, that it sounded very similar to, for example, Abraham Hicks. She talks about Abraham as a collective of spiritual entities that are, here to teach and bring wisdom. And I was like, well, I want to know more. Who is this entity? And was kind of expecting, a blueprint in this message that would, lay it all out and tell me.
I'm sorry you were disappointed. Because
I was a little, I have to say, yeah.
Yeah, which is really interesting, which is maybe why I chose to give it that name, because I'm sure the expectation is, and over the years, I've been asked, who are they? What do they look like? And I'll just share, a personal experience that, I'm not that kind of person, but every once in a while I would give in to, those questions or comments and try to get more from Shaltazar. And every time I did, I was shut down. And I kind of realized that I wasn't really supposed to get the details, that what they were bringing forth was more important than who they were. And so over the years, I had to let go of the inquisitiveness as to what they are. It's very, very interesting because although, Shaltazar is the name, it was not the first thing that came to me as I was channeling. As I was channeling, and the wisdom would come through, and I would sort of have a curiosity of where is this coming from. And the first thing that came was actually calcitron. And nowhere in the messages from Shaltazar do we hear calcitron, because although it was the first thing that came through, it didn't stick. And I got a sense that it was a place. It wasn't what I was channeling. And to this day, I don't know, where it is or what it is, but I did get a sense that calcitron was this place. The next thing that did come through was Gavish Baninu before Shaltazar. And my understanding of Gavish Baninu was giver or teacher, Baninu, of all that is good or divine wisdom. Obviously, those two words are not English, so you have to sort of play around with the interpretation. And then Shaltazar came through, and then after that, 33 came through, and I looked up 33, and it was very interesting to realize that there are only three master numbers at this point, 11, 22, and 33. And although 44 is out there, it has not been dubbed a master number yet. And so when I looked up 33, it was the master number, the master teacher, and that made total sense. Since then, I have, visualized this circle of, white coated faceless beings with, lots of light around them. But other than that, I try not to ask too much about who Shaltazar is. And as you mentioned, your disappointment, they use this message to talk about something that I found fascinating that recurs a number of times, and that's the fact that life is circular.
Yeah, it was interesting. In fact, I wrote a note down that this particular message is it's two messages. The first message is about circularity, clarity. And then the second part of the message is about vibrational energy. Both really, interesting and kind of fascinating interrelated concepts.
Mm-hmm. And then interspersed a little bit of that who is Shaltazar, that they are a collective energy, that they bring forth divine wisdom, and that they have come forth to the planet a number of times. And one thing that I know, but it got reiterated in this message, is that these are higher master teachings and that it's up to us to apply them. And therefore, they're not for everyone. At one point, they say, again, we hear you say, but your teachings are so vague. Why don't you bring us more specific learnings? And they say, and to your query, we would say that what we bring to you is master teachings, teachings that are meant to speak to a higher consciousness within the human condition. We cannot bring you the logic, the specifics, or as master teachers, we bring the higher concepts of life, and then it is up to you, the human inhabitants of your planet, to apply these higher notions or principles. Once these teachings are fully integrated and embodied, it is you who will change life on planet Earth. For it is not our place to change your planet, the evolution of which is your responsibility. We are here to give you the building blocks, the principles, the universal laws and insights that can become the foundation for great potential change.
Wow.
So they make it quite clear that they're not going to spoon feed us. At one point, I think they talk about a manual of procedure, and they're not going to give us that. And that's what I think people will either love or hate about the messages of Shaltazar. Those that are, working their logical minds are going to be very disappointed because it just doesn't give them much. And those that are interested more in the esoteric, the mystical, the philosophical, I think find it fascinating because you get this little tidbit, then who knows where it goes.
Right. Yeah. I guess my experience with the messages has always been, and we talked about this before, if you try to consciously process what the messages say, it's almost like you're trying to grab onto a cloud, right? You see it, it's there, it has shape, it has form, but when you try to hold on to it, your hands pass right through it. And so I think my experience has been that it's almost like that it's operating or it's impacting you at a subconscious level where it's going in and it's registering somewhere below your conscious awareness, and it's kind of in the background operating and changing you and informing you without you really knowing it. And then all of a sudden you kind of wake up one day and your perspective is shifted and you kind of think about something or things in a little bit of a different way. So almost like, like an inoculation, right? You get a vaccine for something and you don't see it working, you don't know it's working, but it's inside you changing your DNA or your immune system's adapting to it, and it's making changes that you don't know or see or feel. And then when you encounter some sort of, bug, it's working there and you just don't even notice it. Does that make sense?
100%. Excellent. I couldn't articulate it any better. That's exactly right. And I think that's what they mean in some of the messages. They say, we are here to talk to that part of you that has been here many times before. They talk at an energetic, a soul level. It's fascinating to this day. There are certain messages that I re-listen to from Shaltazar, and halfway through, I'm gone. And all of a sudden the message is over and it's like, oh, I missed it. But as you said, I didn't, because believe it or not, a few days later, a week later, something happens and it was like, whoa, yeah, that's what that message was talking about, even though I didn't seem to be conscious when I was listening to it. So it's extremely magical, I find. And I'm not saying that because it came through me. I'm honored and humbled to be able to bring this wisdom forth. But it does have a power of its own, I find.
Yeah. Right. And, you just mentioned, when someone, says, I channeled this or whatever, explain a little bit, what that means and how it happens with you, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Wow. We got a role reversal here. Hey, you're playing
just a little.
I love that. I love that, Mark. Uh-huh. That's interesting because, it does sound a bit woo-woo. And for the longest time, I hesitated calling myself a channeler. I believe when we channel, we are just tapping into that invisible energy. As you were talking about the cloud or you're talking about the vaccine, and, sometimes now that we're in the midst of this pandemic discussion, vaccines maybe are not a great way, but I think it is a good way of explaining it. Another way of looking at it is electricity. You can't see it going through the wire. You can't see it coming out of the plug, but then all of a sudden it lights up your room and it's sort of working in the background. I believe we all have the power to channel, so to speak. Channeling is just tapping into an invisible power or or energy, and then we translate it. I teach people that I work with that there are 3 steps to getting messages from the invisible world. The first step is what I call the sensory download, because the invisible world guides, angels, Shaltazar, Abraham, Cryon, all of the invisible entities, the ascended masters, I don't believe they speak a language. And that's why it's so important to get in touch with the sensory part of who you are, your feeling senses. There are the 4 major pathways: clairvoyant, clairaudient, clairsentient, and claircognizant. And those are very sensory ways of either clairaudient is hearing something, clairvoyant is getting visions or seeing it, clairsentient is feeling, and claircognizant is knowing. My major pathway is claircognizant. And so I just get a knowingness. And I can't explain it, but it's just, I know it. And so that first step is getting the sensory download, which is why it's so important for us to get out of our heads, to quiet our mind, quiet the obsessive mind, because if you're focusing on the message with your mind, you're not going to hear it. That's why Shaltazar often says, be still, be more still, and be still again. And then another favorite line of mine is, just beyond the nothingness lies great riches. So you quiet your conscious mind, you enliven your senses, and then you may find, and it is available to all of us, you may find that you get this sensory download. And that's step 1. Step 2 is the translation or transcription. So just like if you were looking at a sunset and I said to you, Mark, describe that sunset, you are feeling that sunset. You are feeling the energy of the beauty and the grace and Mother Nature at its best. And then I would say to you, well, describe it to me. If I was a blind person, how would you describe it? So in that moment, you would be translating or transcribing your experience of the sense of that sunset and trying to put it into some sort of words for me. Now, you being a great writer, that might be easier for you, but that's the second step, is that translation or transcription. The third step in channeling is the interpretation. And I think that's what Shaltazar is saying. They're bringing master teachings, and if anyone is familiar with any other of the great channels that have come forth in the planet, and there are a number of them, they don't speak in this articulate English. They often bring forward their stories and their wisdom in stories or in parables or in images or in analogies. And then from that, we take this channeled wisdom and we have to interpret it. And that's where some of the religious doctrine has spent years and years and years dissecting it and coming up with interpretations of what the great masters have brought forth. Now, that's a long answer. I hope it explained it to you in a way that you understood.
I did, and I find it interesting. You mentioned about, that they don't come forth and speak a language. In this message, kind of towards the end, it says, deeper learning is not about numbers, but rather how divine energy converts into many different and diverse ways of communicating to human beings. The source does not speak a language. The source is vibratory energy, and thus communicates through vibratory energy.
So that's exactly what I was saying, is that we get this vibratory energy, and then it's up to us to transcribe it. And, based on the filter, based on my understanding, the words that come forth that I attribute to Shaltazar are not Shaltazar's words, they're mine. In this message, it talks about that, one of my favorite lines, which is mine, it talks about you can give a person a fish and they can eat for a day, or you can teach a person how to fish and they eat for a lifetime. Well, that is my filter. That is my interpretation of what they're telling me. I don't think they told me that. They talked to me about their teachings being able to help you live and make different decisions. And then I paraphrase that into a phrase that I was familiar with. So it is the taking of vibratory energy and putting it into words, which
right.
I believe we're all capable of doing.
That's another thing it says down here. It says right here, you are all capable of aligning yourself and receiving the vibrational energy of the master teacher. Simply choose to activate that part of your DNA that opens the pathway to us. And when you do so, the name you will feel may not be Shaltazar. You may not feel the number 33, but let us assure you that regardless of the name or the face or the number you assign to us, you can access the divine teachings that will allow you to change the human evolution of your planet forever.
Right. Which, by the way, and thank you for reading that part of it, you can see why you would be disappointed, because they weren't going to answer the question, who is Shaltazar? Because that would be too specific. that would make it very specific for what they're bringing forth. They really want to open this up to realize that we're all capable of tapping into these master teachings, to the divine wisdom, and we don't have to do it through the name Shaltazar. We don't have to do it through the number 33. We don't have to do it with any particular specificity. We just have to be open to translating vibrational energy into thoughts or words.
Right. So the idea that comes to mind when you say that is that, Shaltazar, or the energy of 33, it reminds me of, old timers like us understand this, but a radio signal, right? Like a radio station. The signal's always out there in the air. It's being broadcast and it's all around us at all times. And all we have to do is turn on a radio and tune to that channel and we can hear something. We can hear voices. We can hear music. We can hear, sporting events. So the broadcast is going on and it's just, so we're the radios, right? We have to choose to dial our tuner into that frequency so we can hear what's going on, hear what it's saying.
Right. And referring back to us as being old timers, I'm sure you remember tuning that radio, and you move it just a quarter of a turn and it goes from static to this clear voice, right? And then you just move it slightly more, you move that dial and you've lost the signal. And I think that's an excellent example of what they're talking about. So if we are the radio, how do we fine tune ourselves to get into the frequency? There are various people that can tune into various different frequencies. The mediums that will tap into bringing messages from loved ones, that's just somewhere else on the dial. That's just somewhere else on the dial. So the key is, and I believe in our DNA, is a propensity to connect to a particular part of the dial easier than others. It's as if, I think the old FM band used to go from 9 something to 1500. I don't know. I can't even remember. But it's as if we're assigned a certain range of that frequency that we are more adept to tap into. Mm-hmm. And then what you have to do within that range is find your specific frequency location, and then you will be able to bring forth that message. I remember, many times at the beginning of my journey, it was like I wanted to do it like this other person. I would see someone channel or someone bring forth messages from the invisible world, and it's like, oh, I want to do that. And I've come to realize that we have a propensity within us to tap into a certain frequency, and don't try to want somebody else's frequency, because you probably won't be very good at it.
Right.
So I encourage the listeners to find your frequency, to do some fine tuning. Best way to do that is to quiet your mind. There was nothing like trying to adjust the radio in the car and everybody was kind of yelling and screaming and distracting you, and you couldn't concentrate on moving that dial so you could just sort of hear the signal and then be able to zero in on that signal. So you want to really keep things more quiet and peaceful. Meditation is a great way to begin to find the frequency that you are aligned to, and then you will start to bring in your messages. Again, I reiterate, don't try to do it like anyone else. Just do it in a way that feels comfortable to you, and you will find that those messages will start to come through you.
Right. Yeah. I know that's how I experience writing. When I'm writing, it's a form of channeling, and I feel like I tune into some sort of knowledge, wisdom, expertise, something, and it just comes out through my fingers instead of out of my mouth. But it does feel like a connection to some otherworldly signal, I guess, right?
And it is, because I've read your writing and I know that it is. And so it manifests in ways that are, not as logical as we think they are. And I encourage listeners to play around with that. And I guess we're just about out of time. This conversation went very quickly. It's interesting. And I love the way these things go because, as I was preparing for today's conversation, and I know you re-listen to the message and reread it. And I really thought that we were going to be talking about the circular nature of life, and we didn't. And that's because we got out of the way and talked about what we were supposed to talk about. But I will set the intention for, in future episodes, to talk about the circular nature of life, because I think it's fascinating. And that's, they squeezed in that major teaching in the midst of this message that sort of told us a bit about who Shaltazar is. And they said that life is not linear, it is circular. And so maybe in upcoming episodes, we can bring that concept forward, because I know for me, I've just scratched the surface on it. It's helped me understand life to a greater degree.
Yeah, that sounds good to me.
Excellent. Thank you so much again, Mark, for doing this with me. I love it. I hope the listeners are enjoying it. Tune in every week to Dissecting the Wisdom wisdom of Shaltazar. Mark Lane, thanks very much, and until next week, love and light to you all.
Thanks, Jeffrey.